Millionaire disguised himself as a pastry chef and went to meet the poor girl he was dating. William Thompson gazed at the city through the enormous windows of his office on the 40th floor. Chicago stretched as far as the eye could see, a sea of buildings and lights that began to glow in the evening. At 32, he had achieved everything he had ever dreamed of. His hotel chain, Thompson Luxury Hotels, was a benchmark for high-end hospitality in America. But something was missing. He sighed, adjusting his Italian tie and running his hand through his perfectly styled brown hair. The meetings that day had been especially exhausting. Everyone smiled too much, agreed too much, flattered too much. William was tired of all the pretense. "Mr. Thompson," his secretary's voice came through the intercom, "you have another meeting at 6 p.m. with the investors." "Cancel it," he replied without hesitation. "Reschedule for tomorrow." He needed air. Real air, not the sterile air-conditioned breeze circulating through the building. He grabbed his jacket and headed to the private elevator. On the way down to the lobby, he recalled the conversation he had with his sister Emily during lunch. "You need to live more, Will," she said, concerned. "You can't hide behind that desk forever. Look at you, 30, flirty, and thriving, as they say. But when was the last time you went out to have fun? Met someone interesting?" Emily was right, as always. Since taking full control of the family business after his father stepped back due to health issues, William had thrown himself into work. He built an empire, expanded the hotel chain, but his personal life had been reduced to formal meetings and shallow relationships. As he left the building, he dismissed his driver. He wanted to walk, to feel the city. Central Park wasn't far and a walk would do him good. On his way, he observed the people, hurried executives like himself, students, street vendors, all immersed in their own stories. That's when he saw her for the first time. She was crossing the street carrying a box of sweets, wearing the simple uniform of a diner. Her black hair was tied up in a casual bun, and even from a distance William could see her genuine smile as she chatted with an elderly man selling candies at the traffic light. Something about that scene touched him deeply. The girl took a coffee from her backpack and offered it to the man, who accepted it with a grateful smile. A simple gesture, but one of such natural generosity that it made William stop to watch. She continued on her way, entering a modest diner on the corner. "Coffee and Company," read the worn-out sign. William stayed there watching through the window as she placed the sweets on the counter, greeting customers with the same genuine warmth. On impulse, he entered the establishment. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread instantly enveloped him. It was a simple but welcoming place. Formica tables, basic chairs, but everything impeccably clean. He sat at a corner table where he could observe the activity. "Welcome to Coffee and Company. What can I get you?" Her voice was soft and melodic. Up close, her eyes were a deep, bright brown. "A coffee, please," he replied, trying not to seem out of place in his Italian suit. "Black? With milk?" "We also have fresh cheese bread," she suggested, with that same sincere smile that had captivated him. "Black, thank you," he answered, noticing the name tag on her uniform. Sophia. As she walked away to prepare his order, William observed the surroundings. The people there seemed genuinely happy, chatting and laughing. There were no social masks, no power games. It was real. Sophia returned with her coffee, served in a simple white porcelain cup. "I hope you like it. It's a special coffee they roast nearby." The first sip surprised him. It was truly exceptional, better than many gourmet coffees he had tasted in his hotels. "It's perfect," he praised sincerely. She smiled, satisfied, and went back to work. William watched her interact with the other customers, always attentive, always present. He noticed how she set aside some leftover bread and pastries in a box, probably to donate later. At that moment, an idea began to form in his mind, a crazy, impulsive idea, completely outside his usual pattern of behavior. And the more he thought about it, the more certain he was that he needed to do something different. He finished his coffee, left a generous tip, and walked out of the cafe with a clear goal. He needed to get to know Sophia. Not as William Thompson, the millionaire businessman, but as an ordinary person, someone real. He picked up the phone and called Emily. "Little sis, I need your help with something completely crazy," he said as soon as she answered. "And you're going to love every second of it." Emily stared at her brother with a mix of disbelief and amusement in her Greenwich Village apartment. Let me get this straight. You want to pose as a pastry chef to work at a cafe? William nodded, pacing back and forth in the living room. I need your help to create a convincing story. You know people from all walks of life. You have connections in the culinary world. And why exactly has my dear workaholic brother decided to take this sharp turn in life? Emily asked, pouring a glass of wine for each of them. William stopped, thoughtful. How could he explain that feeling that had taken over him when he saw Sophia? How to put into words the way her sincere smile had touched something dormant within him? You yourself said I needed to live more, he replied, picking up his glass. Today I saw something different, something real, and for the first time in years, I felt the desire to be a part of it. Emily studied her brother for a few moments. She recognized that determined look. It was the same one he had when he decided to conquer something in business. But there was something more there, something she hadn't seen since they were teenagers. All right, she finally agreed. I'll help you, but on one condition. You have to promise me you'll be careful. Not just with your safety, but also with the feelings of the people involved. In the following weeks, the siblings worked on William's new identity. Emily used her connections to create a convincing backstory. He would be Daniel Johnson, a pastry chef who had studied in France and was returning to America after a few years abroad. William dedicated himself to learning the basics of pastry making. He spent hours watching videos, practicing recipes, studying techniques. Emily managed to get a friend who was a chef to give him some intensive private lessons. You don't need to be an expert, the chef explained, but you need to know enough to not embarrass yourself. At the same time, William began to transform his appearance. He let his beard grow a bit, adopted more casual clothes, and swapped his expensive watches for a simple model. His executive wardrobe was replaced with jeans, t-shirts, and aprons. The secret is in the details, Emily advised, helping him choose the right clothes. Your hands are too well kept for a pastry chef. We need to do something about that. William started doing manual work, letting his hands develop small calluses. He observed closely how ordinary people behaved, their gestures, their way of speaking. Gradually, Daniel Johnson began to take shape. In the office, he organized everything for his absence. He informed the board that he would take a leave of absence for a few months to focus on personal projects, delegating responsibilities to trusted executives. Few knew his true plan. Only Emily and his personal lawyer were aware. Finally, the day came to put the plan into action. William, now Daniel, entered Coffee & Company, carrying a carefully crafted resume. Sophia was there, as always, her smile lighting up the room. "Good morning," he said, his voice deliberately softer than usual. "I heard you're in need of a pastry chef." Sophia looked at him with interest. "Yes, we are. Our pastry chef is retiring at the end of the month. Do you have experience?" Daniel handed over his resume, feeling his heart beat a little faster. It was the first time he had spoken to her as his new persona. "I worked for a few years in France," he replied, keeping his tone modest. "I'm returning to America now, looking for something more authentic." Mrs. Margaret, the owner of the cafe, joined them. She was a woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a kind smile. She examined the resume carefully. "Can we do a trial?" she proposed. "Tomorrow, if you can come, I need to see how you perform in practice." Daniel nodded, feeling a mix of anxiety and excitement. "Of course, that would be great. What time should I come?" "At 6 in the morning," Sophia replied, and there was something in her gaze that suggested she was gauging his reaction. "That's when we start preparing everything for the day." "I'll be here," he assured her, holding her gaze. As he left the diner, William took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of his new life as Daniel Johnson, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly alive. At 5:30 in the morning, Daniel was already in front of Coffee & Company. The street, usually bustling during the day, still slept under the dim glow of the streetlights. He wore jeans, a white t-shirt, and carried a backpack with his apron and basic baking tools, a gift from Emily, who had insisted on the details. Mrs. Margaret arrived promptly at 6, the keys jingling in her hands. "You're punctual, Daniel. That's good." Her smile was warm, but her eyes were observant. "Let's see what you're capable of." The diner's kitchen was small but organized. The aroma of coffee already filled the space. Sophia had arrived through the back and was preparing the first batch of the day. She greeted him with a nod, her eyes still sleepy, but her smile as genuine as ever. "So, Daniel," Mrs. Margaret began, "today is the day to make carrot cake, gingerbread, and cookies. Show us what you can do." Daniel took a deep breath. He had practiced these recipes dozens of times over the past few weeks. He started by gathering the ingredients, moving with the caution of someone unfamiliar with a new kitchen. Sophia watched him discreetly as she arranged the cups on the counter. The next few hours were intense. Daniel was sweating as he mixed, whisked, and baked. His movements weren't as fluid as those of an experienced baker, but there was dedication in every gesture. The smell of freshly baked carrot cake began to fill the air. Mrs. Margaret murmured, tasting a piece. "Different from what we usually do, but it's really good. You have a special touch with the frosting." Sophia also tried it, and her eyes lit up. "Wow, it really is delicious. It has a nostalgic flavor. It reminds me of the cakes my mum used to make." Daniel felt his heart warm at the comment. He wouldn't tell them that the recipe was actually from his own mother, one of the few memories he had of her in the kitchen before work consumed all his time. The crowd started to pick up around 7 o'clock. Daniel watched in fascination as Sophia handled the customers. She didn't just serve coffee, she created connections. She knew the names of all the regulars, asked about their families, and remembered how each one liked their coffee. "Mr. John, today I brought that honey bread I promised you," she said to a gray-haired gentleman. "It goes well with the extra strong coffee you like." During a break, Sophia approached Daniel, who was organizing a fresh batch of cookies. "You don't seem very used to small kitchens," she observed perceptively. "In France I worked in bigger places," he improvised, remembering the script he had created with Emily. "But I like it here more. It has soul." Sophia smiled, agreeing. "Hey, it's true. Mrs. Margaret built this place with a lot of love. Every customer is like family." She paused, studying him. "Why did you decide to come back to America?" Daniel stopped for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I'm tired of the formality, the pressure for perfection. I wanted something more real, genuine connections." Something in his words seemed to touch Sophia. "I know exactly what you mean," she replied, her gaze distant for a moment. "Sometimes the simplest things are the most valuable." The day continued at a fast pace. Daniel quickly learned the routine, the peak hours, the preferences of regular customers, the donation system Sophia organized with the day's leftovers. His hands, already worn from previous training, gained new marks from the work. At the end of the shift, Mrs. Margaret called him into her small office. "Daniel, you're not the most experienced baker who's ever worked here," she began, and his heart froze for a moment. "But there's something special about you, a genuine humility and willingness to learn. If you want, the job is yours." Daniel felt a sincere smile form on his face. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Margaret. I promise not to let you down." As he left the cafe, now nighttime, his back ached and his feet begged for rest. But there was a different kind of satisfaction in his chest, something he had never felt after a day of meetings in his executive office. On his way home, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. "So, how was my little brother's first day as a baker?" Daniel smiled, typing his reply. "Exhausting, painful, and absolutely perfect." The following weeks brought a completely new routine for William, now fully immersed in his life as Daniel. His mornings started before sunrise, and his nights ended with a tired body, but a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in a long time. Between batches of bread and cakes, he began to get to know Sophia better. He discovered that she was studying culinary arts at night, balancing school, work, and caring for her mother. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about her dreams of one day having her own business. "I want to create a place that's more than just a cafe," she confided one morning, as they prepared croissant dough together. "A space where people can feel at home, where stories happen." Daniel watched her with admiration, his skilled hands folding the dough with precision. "How do you manage to do all this? Work, study, take care of your mom?" Sophia's smile wavered for a moment. "It's not easy, especially after Mum got sick. She was a manager at a luxury hotel, Thompson Luxury Hotels. She worked there for 15 years. Daniel felt his stomach sink. "What happened?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "She was let go when she got sick," Sophia replied, a hint of bitterness in her usually sweet voice. "They didn't even bother to check her rights properly. She was about to retire." Daniel struggled to keep his expression controlled as a wave of guilt washed over him. He had never known about this case. How many other injustices had happened in his company without his knowledge? "But I don't like to talk about it," Sophia continued, forcing a smile. "Life goes on, right? And we're lucky to have people like Mrs. Margaret around." In the days that followed, Daniel began to pay more attention to the customers' conversations. The cafe was a meeting point for people from all walks of life, executives having breakfast, students taking advantage of the free Wi-Fi, retirees playing dominoes on quiet afternoons. Sophia knew everyone's stories. She set aside extra bread for a woman who cared for underprivileged children in the neighborhood, saved newspapers for a retired teacher who collected crossword puzzles, and brewed extra strong coffee for students during exam season. One afternoon, while they were cleaning the kitchen, Daniel found her quietly crying. "Sophia, what's wrong?" She quickly wiped away her tears. "It's nothing. I'm just a little worried. Mom's medication has gotten more expensive, and the health insurance is becoming harder to keep up with." Without thinking, Daniel placed his hand on her shoulder. "Hey, it's going to be okay. You're not alone." Sophia looked at him, her eyes still watery, but with a small smile. "Thank you, Daniel. You're a good friend." Those words, so simple and sincere, hit him hard. There she was, calling him a friend, trusting him, while he was living a lie. That night in his apartment, William made a decision. The next day, a social worker visited Sophia's home, informing her that her mother had been selected for a medical assistance program. William had moved heaven and earth through his foundation to create a project that would benefit former hotel employees with health issues. "It's a miracle," Sophia said, beaming, as they prepared the morning's first batch of bread. "I don't know how, but Mom was selected for an assistance program. They're going to cover her entire treatment." Daniel smiled, feeling a mix of joy and guilt. "What wonderful news. You deserve good things, Sophia." "You know," she said thoughtfully, "sometimes I think the universe puts the right people in our path. Ever since you arrived here, it feels like things have started to get better." If only she knew the truth behind her words. Daniel swallowed hard, aware that each passing day made it harder to keep his secret. But how to tell the truth without destroying the trust I had earned? Autumn arrived, bringing colder mornings and the scent of cinnamon and spices that now filled Coffee and Company. Daniel had suggested some seasonal recipes that became an instant hit: ginger cookies, cinnamon apple cakes, and spiced breads that reminded him of his travels through Europe. On a particularly busy morning, Sophia surprised him with an invitation. "Would you like to join me at the market after work? I need to buy some fresh fruit for this week's pies." Daniel felt his heart race. It was the first time they would do something together outside the cafe. "Of course, I'd love to," he replied, trying to hold back the smile that threatened to take over his entire face. The farmers' market at Union Square was a festival of colors and aromas. Sophia walked through the stalls with familiarity, greeting the vendors by name, picking out fruit with the expertise of someone who knew what they were doing. Daniel watched her, enchanted by her natural ease. "Come, I want to show you something," she said, taking his hand without thinking. The casual touch sent a shiver down his spine. Sophia led him to a stall at the end of the market, where an older man was selling honey and handmade goods. "Mr. August, I brought that pastry chef friend I told you about," she introduced. "Daniel, this is the best honey in the city." The rest of the afternoon passed like a dream. They sampled different types of honey, talked about recipes, and laughed at the stories Mr. August told. Sophia was especially radiant, her eyes shining as she planned new creations for the cafe. On the way back, they stopped at a small park. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange. They sat on a bench, their shopping bags at their feet. "Mom is doing much better," Sophia commented, her gaze lost on the horizon. "The new treatment is working miracles. You know, sometimes I think it was you who brought luck into our lives." Daniel felt the weight of guilt in his chest. "Sophia, Shh," she gently interrupted him. "Look at the sunset. Isn't it beautiful? Sometimes we just need to appreciate the moment." They stayed silent, watching the sky change colors. Daniel felt the warmth of Sophia's arm against his, the subtle vanilla scent she always carried from working in the kitchen, the peace of that simple moment. That's when he realized he was hopelessly in love with her. In the days that followed, Daniel found himself noticing every little detail about Sophia: the way she tied her hair back when she was focused, her smile as she served breakfast to the regulars, the dedication with which she studied her culinary books during quieter moments. One morning, she arrived at the cafe especially excited. "Daniel, I need to show you something." She pulled a crumpled flyer from her bag. It was a culinary competition hosted by a famous magazine. "The theme is Flavors of Memory," she explained, her eyes sparkling. "Participants have to create a dessert that tells a personal story. The prize is a scholarship for a pastry specialization course." Daniel smiled, caught up in her enthusiasm. "Are you going to enter?" "I really want to," she replied, biting her lip. "But I need help. Would you help me practice? Your experience would be so valuable." "Of course I'll help," he answered without hesitation. How could he say no to her? They started practicing after work. Sophia had a clear idea. She wanted to recreate a dessert her mother used to make when she was a child, but with a modern twist. Daniel helped her with techniques and suggestions, amazed by her creativity and determination. One evening, as they were testing the latest version of the recipe, Sophia burst into laughter seeing Daniel's face smeared with chocolate. "Wait," she said, moving closer. Gently, she wiped the stain from his face. The touch of her fingers was soft, warm. For a moment they stood there, close, the air thick with unspoken possibilities. Daniel felt his heart race. It would be so easy to lean in and kiss her, but he couldn't. Not while he kept that lie between them. Sophia stepped back first, a faint blush on her cheeks. I think this version is perfect," she said, turning her attention back to the dessert. Daniel agreed, his voice hoarse. "It's going to win the competition, I'm sure." That night, in his apartment, William stared at his reflection in the mirror. How much longer could he keep up this charade? How could he continue deceiving Sophia when every passing day only made him fall more in love with her? Emily had warned him about this. "Be careful with the feelings involved," she had said, but it was already too late. His heart no longer belonged to him. The day of the competition was approaching, and Sophia spent every free moment perfecting her recipe. Daniel watched her dedication with a mix of admiration and growing apprehension. Every smile from her, every moment of closeness, only deepened his inner torment. One particularly busy morning, a familiar face appeared at the cafe. Daniel felt his blood run cold as he recognized Michael Roberts, the CFO of his company, walking into the establishment. "An espresso, please," Michael requested, sitting at the counter. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Daniel, who was trying to discreetly hide in the kitchen. The look of recognition on his face was immediate. "William," he whispered, incredulous. Sophia, who was nearby serving another customer, turned around, confused. "Daniel, do you know this man?" Before he could answer, Michael was already standing up, an ironic smile on his lips. "Daniel? No, this is William Thompson, owner of Thompson Luxury Hotels. What are you doing here, William? A new marketing strategy." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia looked from one to the other, understanding and hurt emerging on her face. The cups she held trembled slightly in her hands. "Sophia, I can explain," William began, his voice faltering. But she had already placed the cups on the counter and headed to the back of the cafe. Mrs. Margaret, who was watching the scene from her usual spot, gestured for him to follow her. William found Sophia in the small backyard garden where they used to take their breaks. She had her back to him, her shoulders tense. "Why?" she asked, her voice heavy with emotion. "Why did you lie all this time?" "I wanted to get to know you," he replied, feeling each word weigh on his tongue. "The real you, without the burden of my name or position." Sophia turned to face him, tears glistening in her eyes. "And it never crossed your mind that lying wasn't the way? What kind of real relationship is built on a lie?" "At first, it was just curiosity," he tried to explain. "But then I met you, your kindness, your strength. I fell in love, Sophia, for who you are, for everything you represent." "And my mother?" she asked suddenly. "The healthcare program. Was that you?" William nodded, unable to deny anything further. "When I found out what had happened to her, I had to do something to fix that mistake. She should never have been let go like that." Sophia let out a bitter laugh. "So you decided to play God? Watch closely as the poor mortals suffer and hand out your kindness when it suited you?" "It wasn't like that," he protested. "Everything I felt, everything we lived here was real." "Real?" she questioned, angrily wiping away a tear. "How can I know what was real? The humble baker I met doesn't exist. It was all a fantasy, an elaborate lie." Mrs. Margaret appeared at the door, her usually serene face marked by concern. "Sophia, dear, the customers—" "I'm coming, Mrs. Margaret," Sophia replied, composing herself. Before leaving, she looked at William one last time. "Don't come back here. Please." William stood there, feeling the weight of his choices crash down on his shoulders. The garden, once a place of sweet, shared moments, now felt suffocating. The plants that Sophia cared for so tenderly seemed to wilt under the weight of the revealed truth. She returned to the kitchen in silence, removed her apron for the last time, and folded it carefully. Mrs. Margaret watched her with a mix of disappointment and understanding. "You know, young man," she said softly, "sometimes we try to do the right thing the wrong way. What matters is that we learn from our mistakes." William nodded, unable to find the words. He left through the back door, carrying only his backpack and the weight of his regrets. On his way home, he passed by the market, where he had lived one of the happiest afternoons of his life. Now the colorful stalls seemed devoid of life. In his apartment, he found Emily waiting for him. She didn't need words to understand what had happened. Her brother's devastated face said it all. "Oh, Will," she sighed, hugging him. "What are you going to do now?" He pulled away from the hug, walking to the window. The city continued its frenetic dance outside, indifferent to his personal drama. "I'm going to fix things," he finally replied. "I don't know how yet, but I'll try to do the right thing, for real this time." A week had passed since the revelation at Coffee and Company. William threw himself into his work, but not like before. Now every minute in his office was dedicated to a mission, transforming his company from the inside out. "I want a full audit of all termination cases from the last 5 years," he instructed his legal team. "Especially employees let go due to health issues. I want to know exactly what happened in each case." Emily watched him with a mix of pride and concern. "What about Sophia?" "You can't just give up." "I'm not giving up," William replied, running his hand through his already messy hair. "I'm trying to be worthy of her." The days had turned into a whirlwind of changes. William implemented new human resources policies, created more comprehensive benefits programs, and established an assistance fund for employees with health issues. Each measure was thought out not just in terms of numbers, but for real people, with real stories. At home, his nights were dedicated to studying humanized management and social responsibility. His once impeccable apartment was now covered in books, notes, and spreadsheets. On the kitchen table, a local newspaper caught his attention. It was the announcement for the culinary competition. It would take place that weekend. Meanwhile, at Coffee and Company, Sophia was preparing for the big day. Mrs. Margaret watched her work tirelessly on her recipe, concerned about the increasingly visible dark circles under her eyes. "Dear, you need to rest a little," the older woman advised, placing a cup of tea beside her. Sophia shook her head, focused on her dough. "Everything needs to be perfect, Mrs. Margaret. This competition, it's my chance to make my dream come true." What Sophia didn't tell anyone was that every night after finishing her practice, she found herself searching for Daniel's familiar presence in the kitchen. His easy laugh, his gentle suggestions, his attentive gaze. But then she remembered Daniel didn't exist. He was just an illusion created by William Thompson. Her mother, Mary, now recovering at home thanks to the treatment, tried to talk about it. "Sweetheart, sometimes people make mistakes while trying to do the right thing." "He lied, Mom," Sophia replied firmly. "For months. How can I trust someone like that?" Mary took her daughter's hand in hers. "You know what intrigues me the most? Since that healthcare program started, dozens of other former employees have been helped. It wasn't just me." Sophia stopped her movements with the dough. This information was new. "What do you mean?" "Thompson Luxury Hotels has changed," Mary continued. "They've created a rehiring program for employees who were unfairly dismissed, improved benefits, and even opened a daycare for employees' children." Sophia tried to ignore the tightness in her chest. She remembered her conversations with Daniel, no, William, about transformation and authenticity. Were those words true after all? The night before the competition, as she finalized the last details of her recipe, Sophia received an unexpected delivery. A small wooden box containing various types of artisanal honey, including that special one they had discovered together at the market. Along with it, just a card. "To sweeten your recipe, good luck tomorrow, W." Her hands trembled as she held the jar of honey. The sweet aroma brought back memories of that afternoon at the market. The shared laughter, the exchanged stories. Were those moments less genuine just because he had used a different name? Sometimes, Mrs. Margaret's voice sounded softly behind her, the true flavor of a recipe isn't in the ingredients, but in the story it tells. Sophia looked at the honey in her hands, then at her nearly finished recipe. Perhaps it was time to tell a different story. The hall of the Chicago Culinary Center was filled with aromas and anticipation. Dozens of participants arranged their stations, preparing for the big moment. Sophia adjusted her apron, her hands slightly shaky as she organized the ingredients. "Contestants, you have 2 hours to prepare your dishes," the announcer declared. "The theme is Flavors of Memory. Your desserts must tell a story. Begin." Sophia took a deep breath and started her work. Her hands moved with precision, years of practice at the diner guiding her movements. The scent of vanilla and spices began to spread from her station. In the audience, Mrs. Margaret and Mary watched proudly. And, discreetly seated at the back of the room, William observed every movement of Sophia, his heart tight with longing and admiration. "She changed the recipe," Emily whispered softly beside him. William hadn't noticed his sister's arrival. "What do you mean? Look at the ingredients she's using. It's not the same recipe you two practiced." William watched more closely. Indeed, Sophia had incorporated new elements into her original creation. The honey he had sent was there, but she combined it in unexpected ways with other ingredients. Time flew by. Sophia worked with total concentration, her hands dancing between utensils and ingredients. When the host announced the final 15 minutes, she was already putting the finishing touches on her presentation. "Time's up. Step away from your stations," announced the host. One by one, the participants presented their creations to the judges. Childhood stories, family recipes, memories transformed into flavors filled the room. Finally, it was Sophia's turn. "My dessert is called Transformation," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "It's a reinterpretation of a treat my mother used to make during my childhood, but with new elements that represent change and growth." The judges observed the presentation, a delicate millefeuille filled with vanilla cream and honey, decorated with crystallized flowers and a golden glaze that shimmered under the lights. "The honey used is special," Sophia continued, and William held his breath. "I've learned that sometimes we need to be open to new flavors, to new stories. That transformation is also a kind of memory, the memory of what we can become." The first judge tasted the dessert, closing their eyes in appreciation. "The combination is surprising. The honey brings an unexpected depth to the traditional cream." "There are layers of flavor here," commented another judge. "Each bite reveals something new. It's as if the recipe tells a story that unfolds gradually." Sophia waited, her hands clasped together as the judges deliberated. William wanted to stand up, go to her, and tell her how proud he was, but he remained in his seat, respecting the space she had asked for. After what felt like an eternity, the judges returned with their decision. The host took the envelope with the results, creating a moment of suspense. And the first place in the Memory Flavors contest goes to Sophia Johnson, with her creation, Transformation. The audience erupted in applause. Mary and Mrs. Margaret hugged each other, crying with joy. Sophia, for a moment, stood frozen, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. As she stepped onto the stage to receive her prize, the much-desired scholarship, Sophia scanned the audience. Her eyes met William's for a brief moment. He smiled discreetly and nodded in acknowledgement. "Congratulations, dear." The head judge hugged her. "Your story about transformation and new flavors deeply touched us. You have a bright future ahead." After the award ceremony, as Sophia received hugs and congratulations, William prepared to leave discreetly. But before he could reach the door, he heard her voice. "Transformation," Sophia said, now standing just a few steps away from him, "is a continuous process, isn't it?" William turned, his heart racing. "Yes," he replied softly. "And sometimes we need the help of others to realize we need to change." Sophia nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Thank you for the honey." "It was an honor," he replied, and both knew they were talking about much more than just honey. At that moment, something shifted in the air between them. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps it was the beginning of a new chapter. 2 weeks after the competition, Sophia began her pastry specialization course. The classes were a dream come true, but something had changed within her. Every new technique she learned, every recipe she mastered, made her think of bigger possibilities. During a practical class, her instructor observed her technique closely. "You have a special touch, Sophia. Have you ever thought about expanding your horizons, opening your own business?" Sophia smiled, thoughtful. Her instructor's words echoed ideas that had already been growing in her mind. Coffee and Company was her home, but maybe it was time to aim higher. That afternoon, when she returned to the cafe, she found Mrs. Margaret talking to someone she didn't expect to see, William Thompson. "Sophia, I'm glad you're here," Mrs. Margaret smiled. "Mr. Thompson came with an interesting proposal for us." Sophia felt her heart race, but kept her composure. William looked different, not just in appearance, with his impeccable suit, but there was something more in his eyes. A humility that hadn't been there before. "Can I have 5 minutes of your time?" he asked softly. She nodded, and they walked to the same table where, months earlier, he had sat for the first time as Daniel. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on either of them. "I'm implementing a new project in the hotels," William began. "We want to create more welcoming spaces, more connected to the local community, and I thought, why not start by transforming Coffee and Company?" Sophia furrowed her brow, confused. "How so?" "A partnership," he explained. "Expanding the cafe, turning it into a larger space, connected to the hotel here in the area, but keeping its essence, its soul. And you would be in charge of everything." "Me?" Sophia asked, surprised. "You have the talent, Sophia. You won the competition. You're specializing. But more than that, you understand what makes a place special. It's not just about the food, it's about connections, stories, people." Sophia observed the movement in the cafe, the regular customers, the lively conversations, the familiar aroma of coffee and fresh bread. She thought about how many lives were touched there daily. "And Mrs. Margaret?" she asked. "She would be a partner, of course. This place is as much hers as it could be ours. The idea is to expand, not replace." Sophia noticed the use of ours, but didn't comment. Instead, she asked, "Why?" William took a deep breath. "Because you taught me something important. When I came here as Daniel, I discovered a different world. I saw how small gestures can transform lives. I want to be part of that, Sophia. Not as Daniel, not as the businessman William Thompson, but as someone who learned the value of genuine connections." The silence that followed was filled with the familiar hum of the cafe. Sophia observed the man in front of her, no longer the timid pastry chef she had once known, nor the distant businessman he used to be, but someone new, someone who seemed to have found a balance between those two worlds. "I'll need time," she finally said, "to think, to plan." "Take all the time you need," he replied, "and if you decide to accept, we'll do it your way. You know the soul of this place better than anyone." At that moment, an elderly customer approached the table. "Sophia, dear, that new honey bread you made today is divine." She smiled, thanking him. William watched the interaction with warmth. It was exactly this that made the place special. Sophia had a gift for making every person feel unique, special. "You know," she said after the customer walked away, "that honey bread, I used your recipe, well, Daniel's recipe." A small smile played on her lips. "With a few of my own tweaks, of course." William felt his heart warm. It was the first time she had mentioned that period without bitterness in her voice. "I always knew you'd do better than me," he replied. Sophia looked out the window, watching the street activity. People hurried by. Others strolled slowly. Some stopped to look at the diner's display, each with their own story, their struggles, their dreams. "Give me a week," she finally said. "I need to talk to Mrs. Margaret, my mom. And I need to be sure this isn't just..." "Isn't just what?" William asked softly. "Your way of making amends," she finished, looking him in the eyes. "No," he replied firmly. "It's my way of doing the right thing. Redemption? Well, that's a longer journey." Sophia nodded, understanding. Both of them had changed over the past few months. Perhaps it was time to build something new, something genuine from the start. 1 week, turned into 2, then 3. Sophia immersed herself in research, studies, and conversations with Mrs. Margaret. Every detail of William's proposal was analyzed, every possibility considered. Mary, her mother, now fully recovered, had become her main advisor. "My dear, sometimes the universe presents us with opportunities disguised as challenges. The important thing is to follow our hearts, but without forgetting to use our heads." On a particularly busy afternoon at Coffee and Company, Sophia observed the hustle and bustle with new eyes. She saw not just what the place was, but what it could become. She envisioned larger spaces, a bigger kitchen, cooking classes for the community. "Have you made your decision yet?" Mrs. Margaret asked, placing a cup of tea on the table where Sophia was jotting down notes. "I think so," Sophia replied, a smile forming on her lips. "But I need to be sure about a few things first." The next morning, Sophia visited the headquarters of Thompson Luxury Hotels for the first time. The imposing building didn't intimidate her as she had expected, perhaps because now she saw beyond the facade, just as she had learned to see beyond appearances with William. "Miss Johnson," the receptionist smiled. "Mr. Thompson is waiting for you." William's office was exactly as she had imagined, spacious, elegant, with a panoramic view of the city. But there were subtle changes. Photos of social projects on the walls, a small vertical garden near the window, an artisanal coffee machine in the corner. "Sophia," he stood up to greet her. "It's good that you came. We need to talk," she said, straight to the point. "About the project, about the future, about us." William nodded, gesturing toward the more casual sofa in the corner of the office. Sophia noticed it was the same spot where her mother used to sit when she worked there. "Before any decision," she began, "I need to know, why do you really want to do this? And please be completely honest." William thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "When I started that charade as Daniel, I was searching for something I didn't even know I needed. I found not just you, but a different way of seeing the world. Coffee and Company taught me more about humanity in a few months than I learned in years managing luxury hotels." He paused, pouring water for both of them. "This project isn't about redemption, Sophia. It's about evolution. I want to create spaces that bring people together, that make a difference in their lives. And I can't think of anyone better than you to lead this." Sophia absorbed his words, searching for any sign of insincerity. She found none. "I have some conditions," she said finally. "I'm listening. First, I want full creative autonomy. The space needs to maintain its essence, its connection to the community." "Of course," William agreed readily. "Second, I want to implement a training program for young people in the area. Cooking classes, basic management, real opportunities. We could expand that to other hotels in the chain," he suggested, his eyes lighting up at the possibility. "And third," she hesitated for a moment, "I want us to start over, from scratch. No lies, no disguises." William felt his heart race. "What do you mean?" "If we're going to work together, build something together, I need to know the real William. Not the businessman, not the disguised pastry chef, but you. Completely." A genuine smile lit up his face. "How about we start with a coffee? I know an amazing cafe nearby." Sophia couldn't help but smile. "This time, you're paying." They left the office together, heading down to Coffee and Company. The place was quiet at that time of the afternoon. They sat at their usual table, but this time it was different. There were no masks, no roles to play. "So, William Thompson," Sophia began, a playful glint in her eyes. "Tell me about yourself, the real you." And so, over cups of coffee and genuine smiles, they began to build something new. It wasn't an ending, but a fresh start. A story that, like the best recipes, needed time, patience, and above all, real ingredients to succeed. The following months were a time of intense transformation. Coffee and Company underwent a careful renovation, expanding its space without losing its cozy charm. Sophia oversaw every detail, ensuring the essence of the place remained intact. "The floor can be new," she explained to the workers, "but we need to keep that worn-out corner near the counter. It's where Mr. John has leaned on his cane every morning for 15 years. William watched in awe as she balanced change and tradition. The space had gained a modern industrial kitchen, but it kept the old stove where Mrs. Margaret still prepared her special breads. A cozy seating area was created, with bookshelves and study tables, but the original counter with its time-worn stools remained untouched. "You know what impresses me most about you," William remarked one afternoon as they reviewed blueprints and plans. "How you can see the potential in things without disregarding their current value." Sophia smiled, tucking a stubborn strand of hair that kept falling over her eyes. "I learned from someone who transformed completely without losing their essence." The comment caught William off guard. Over the past few months, as they worked together on the project, their relationship had evolved into something new, a partnership built on mutual respect and honesty. The community youth training program was an immediate success. Sophia personally selected the first 15 participants, creating a curriculum that blended culinary techniques with basic business management. "We don't just want to train cooks," she explained during a meeting. "We want to give them the tools to dream bigger." Mary, now fully recovered, became a constant presence in the project. Her previous experience in the hotel industry proved invaluable in bridging the gap between the corporate world and the local reality. "Look at the irony," she said to Sophia one night after a particularly successful class. "Sometimes we need to get lost to find our true path." The new space began to take shape. One area was dedicated to hands-on classes with individual workstations and professional equipment. Another became a cafe library, where students could spend hours studying while enjoying fresh pastries. William made a point of being actively involved in everything, not as the owner of the hotel chain, but as someone who had rediscovered the value of the little things. He was often seen helping in the kitchen, now with much more refined skills than in his days as Daniel. "Good thing you've improved your baking," Sophia teased one day, tasting his croissants. "These are really good." "I had an excellent teacher," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intimacy that grew stronger each day. News of the transformation of Coffee and Company began to spread throughout the city. Journalists appeared interested in learning about the innovative project that combined gastronomy, education, and social responsibility. But what caught the most attention was the atmosphere of the place. It remained a space where everyone felt welcome regardless of their background or social status. One afternoon, as they were organizing the final details for the opening of the renovated space, Sophia found William alone in the kitchen, practicing the recipe for the honey bread she had created for the competition. "Still trying to unravel my culinary secrets?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. William smiled, his hands covered in flour. "Actually, I'm trying to create something new, a recipe that combines our stories." Sophia stepped closer, watching his movements. "How's it going?" "It's not perfect yet," he admitted, "but I think I'm on the right track." The double meaning of his words didn't go unnoticed. Sophia took a bit of the dough, tasting it thoughtfully. "Maybe it needs a touch of honey," she suggested, reaching for the special jar he had given her months before. They worked together in silence, their movements synchronized like a familiar dance. The sweet aroma began to fill the kitchen, mingling with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and shared memories. "Sophia," William began, his voice soft. I know," she replied, a gentle smile on her lips. "Me too." In that moment, surrounded by the scent of spices and unspoken promises, they both knew that some stories don't need words to be told. Like a good recipe, sometimes the secret lies in letting the ingredients find their own time to blend. The morning of the grand opening of the new Coffee and Company dawned sunny. The space, now doubled in size but retaining its original charm, was impeccable. Fresh flowers adorned the tables, and the aroma of freshly baked bread and cakes filled the air. Sophia had been in the kitchen since 5 in the morning, ensuring everything was perfect. Her first class of students from the training program helped with the preparations, their young faces radiant with pride and anticipation. "Remember," she instructed the group, "today, we're not just serving food, we're sharing stories, creating memories." William arrived early, carrying a small box. He found Sophia in the back area, where the old garden had been transformed into a community vegetable patch. "I brought something for you," he said, handing her the box. Inside was a new apron, made of fine yet durable fabric. Hand-embroidered, it read, "Where stories and flavors meet, Coffee and Company." "I thought the chef needed a special apron for today," he smiled. Sophia ran her fingers over the delicate embroidery, moved. "It's perfect," she whispered. The first guests began to arrive at 9. Mr. John, faithful as ever, was the first, leaning on his cane in his usual spot. Mrs. Margaret, elegant in her new dress, welcomed everyone with her warm smile. The new space was impressive. The traditional coffee area retained its original charm, now complemented by a cozy study space, a modern teaching kitchen, and a small amphitheater for demonstration classes. Mary, radiant in her new role as social projects coordinator for the hotel chain, led groups of visitors, explaining every aspect of the training program. "This project is more than a business," she explained. "It's a bridge between worlds, a chance for real transformation." Mid-morning, William asked for everyone's attention. Standing next to Sophia, he seemed nervous, something rare for a businessman accustomed to important presentations. "Coffee and Company has always been a special place," he began, "but it took me getting lost to truly find it. Here, I learned that success isn't measured just in numbers, but in smiles, in shared stories, in transformed lives." His eyes met Sophia's. "And I learned that sometimes we need to wear a mask to discover our true face. But when we find people who accept us as we really are, we no longer need disguises." Sophia felt her heart race as William stepped closer to her, pulling something from his pocket. "This place taught me about real connections, about second chances," he continued. "And now, in front of all these people who are part of our story, I want to ask you a question." A collective sigh swept through the room as William knelt down, presenting a small ring, the same one Sophia had admired months earlier in a store window. "Sophia Johnson, would you do me the honor of building not just this project, but an entire life by your side?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia looked around, at her mother, who smiled through tears, at Mrs. Margaret, who nodded gently at the young students who could barely contain their excitement. Finally, her eyes returned to William. Not the businessman, not the disguised pastry chef, but the man who had learned to be true for love. "Yes," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. "1,000 times yes." The applause and celebrations that followed were interrupted by the sound of spoons clinking against cups, a coffee tradition to mark special moments. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with laughter and tears of joy. Later, when the commotion died down, Sophia and William found a moment alone in the backyard garden. The afternoon sun painted the sky in golden hues, reflecting on the new plants growing lushly. "You know," Sophia remarked, playing with the ring on her finger, "I think we've finally found the perfect recipe." William hugged her from behind, breathing in the vanilla scent she always carried. "And what would that be?" "1 part courage, 2 parts honesty, a lot of love, and a pinch of madness," she smiled. "Oh, and honey, always honey." The bell at the front door rang, announcing new customers. Soon they would need to return, continuing their routine of transforming lives through coffee and smiles. But for now they stayed there, savoring the moment. Because sometimes happiness tastes like freshly brewed coffee, smells like warm bread, and feels like the warmth of true love. And at Coffee and Company, that recipe would be prepared every day, serving not just food for the body, but also for the soul.